Hi BookTube, I am here today to talk about nonfiction books. Nonfiction is one of the genres that I am very passionate about and that I think doesn't get enough credit here on BookTube. So I'm here today to give, I believe, yes, 6 nonfiction book recommendations to change the way that you see the world. And these are nonfiction books that I think that, regardless of where you are in life or even your particular interests, will really change the way you see the world and really will give you a broader perspective on life. And I think that these are all subjects that we should all learn about. So without further ado, the first book that I have here is A Woman in Berlin by Anonymous. So this is a war diary of a single woman who was a journalist who lived in Berlin after it was occupied by the Russians during World War II. Now, this is fairly unknown, but after the city was taken, like huge portions of women were continually raped, and it's all about what life is like in a conquered city. And it is, I think, a very important read to see what happens to civilians during war and to see not just obviously the casualties, but also the devastation that it occurs, and how hard it was for Germany to come back from this, and especially to all of the mass rape that occurred during this time happened because of every army and every place. Like, Americans raped French women, and Japanese armies raped Chinese women and Indonesian women. Another book that is similar to this that I haven't read yet, so that's why I'm not recommending it today, is The Rape of Nanking, and I will include that in the description. And that is about how I think it was almost 1 million Chinese women were raped by Japanese soldiers after the city was taken. And this is an important book because it shows how everyone is affected by war, and this was actually called like one of Germany's best kept secrets, because it's only now that a couple of generations after the war happened that the women are coming out and finally saying things, and that it's finally being unveiled how massive this was and how barbaric. And so don't think that this was one thing that the Allies did to the Axis, or that the Axis did to the Allies. This happened with every single nationality, and yeah, so I think this is a really important book to read. This was an anonymous journal that was kept by a woman in the city during that time, but after she died, it was released what her name was, and so I highly recommend this. Go check it out, A Woman in Berlin. The next book that I have here is Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee in an Indian History of the American West by D. Brown. So this is obviously a Native American history of the West, but this is really a great comprehensive guide to what really happened in the 1800s that caused the Native Americans to finally lose their land, and what really caused the shift between Native people owning this land and white America owning this land. And this gives a really broad and detailed account of the battles that were fought and the promises that were made, and then unkept. And it showcases too, like, at first you'll be confused because there are lots of different, like, not characters, but people who are mentioned from lots of different tribes, but then you will begin to remember who's who, and it becomes very infuriating because some of the chiefs decided to fight to keep for their land, and some of them decided to negotiate and to compromise, and either way it didn't matter because the same things happened to them. So this is a really important book, and I think it's something that isn't discussed enough, but will really, I think, change the way that you see North American politics. This focuses more on the United States than it does on Canada, but it does mention Canada as well, and even if you aren't American, I think it is still a really worthwhile read, even if you are American or Canadian. So, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, I highly recommend that. The next book that I have is Zealot, The Life and Times of Jesus of Nazareth by Reza Aslan. So this book I actually heard of because there was a viral video a few, I think it was 2 years ago now, where the author was on Fox News and was being interrogated by an anchor for why he wrote a book about Jesus, even though he was a Muslim. So it's kind of intriguing, but Reza Aslan is a professor of religions and a religious scholar, and this is really a book about what do we know about the historical Jesus. Aside from the religious texts, what do we know? What was his life largely like, and who was he? And what Aslan found is that he was a very revolutionary figure, and what he found too is really sort of illuminating about how his words could have been misconstrued, and how and what really like, for example, the fact that he was crucified indicated that he was probably being seen as as an insurgent and a revolutionary, because his only enemies against Rome were crucified. And so it's really, I think it's really helpful in understanding sort of the rise of early Christianity, and as well as ancient times and ancient Rome. And this is not necessary, and it's a very academic look at what we can tell through history about what the life of Jesus was like. If you are Christian, if you are Muslim, if you are atheist, if you are anything, if you have, it's a really important look, I think, that will really change the way that you see religion and, I think, religious studies. So I highly recommend that. Zealot. The next book that I have here is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. I'm not totally sure how to pronounce that. But this book is very well known. I think it's the most popular science nonfiction book out right now. Well, and this is about a woman named Henrietta Lacks who in, I believe it was 1960s, whose cancerous cells were taken without her permission, but they were incredibly rapidly dividing cells, and they were then sold and grown in labs and were responsible for the vast majority of scientific innovations and medical innovations of the 21st century and 20th century, because they're a vital tool. And not only that, but it is also incredibly illuminating about sort of medical ethics, and also, in addition, civil rights, and how the scientific community has oftentimes used Black people as test subjects, and how up until relatively recently, like, a doctor didn't have to tell you that you had a disease. A doctor might say, you have cancer, you need this operation, give me $1,000, and you would give him the money because you believe him, because he's a doctor, and he would open you up and not do anything, but you'd have no way of knowing. So this is a really vital book for understanding not only scientific innovations or scientific progress in the recent decades, but also scientific ethics and medical ethics, and also racial divisions in the current in the modern world. And yes, so I highly recommend The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. The next book that I have here is Fast Food Nation by Eric Schlosser. Yes, so I know this book might not seem like it's the most intriguing thing when you first hear of it. I had to read this for school, and if I hadn't had to have read it, I probably wouldn't have done it, but I am so glad that I did. This book opened my eyes to the way that the food systems in America, not just necessarily like food service and restaurants, but also the way that we grow food, the way that we kill animals, the way that we treat food service employees, has entirely, completely changed in the past century. And it basically catalogs the the rise of that change in not just America but in the developed world, and how it's basically responsible for because of fast food companies. So this isn't about how fast food is bad for you, because like we all know that, we've all heard of like Super Size Me. This is about the way that at, fast food companies have become so big, and how capitalism has been unhinged, and the way that because of that, these single huge giant companies have transformed our economy, have transformed our workforce, have transformed our agricultural system. And it really opened my eyes to a whole wealth of other issues, and it really just became a starting point for me to one, realize the injustices of animals and the way that animals are being raised, and the injustices to the environment and the way that food is being grown. I just honestly can't highly recommend this enough, because it really opened my eyes to things, and no matter what you're interested in, if you're interested in economics, if you're interested in politics, if you're interested in social justice, or in animal rights, or in the environment, there's something in here for you, and there's something in there, and there's something in sort of the modern food movement for you as well. So, and yeah, so I highly recommend Fast Food Nation. Even though it might not seem like something you'd be interested in, definitely check it out and give it a try, because it just completely blew my mind. Now, the last book that I have here is Regarding the Pain of Others by Susan Sontag. This is a small little book, and it's quite unlike all the other books that I've mentioned. This is a short book of philosophy by a philosopher and photographer, and this is about how we can either exploit or manipulate images or depictions of things in art. And it primarily focuses on photography, but I think it's very useful for all other types of art, from visual art to literature here on BookTube. And this really changed the way that I view art and the way that I view suffering. And it's a short book. I think it's a little over 100 pages, but it packs a very powerful punch. And with just those 100 pages, I was completely transformed. And so it really changed the way that that I see suffering depicted in art. And she asked powerful questions, like, at what point is something exploitation or representation? Where is that line? Are we using other people's suffering to make something seem genuine or seem deep? Or are we, and is that exploitation, or are we using it to, or by not depicting suffering, are we completely, are we ignoring people and keeping them out of history? She asks a lot of very powerful questions, and I think especially for a community that's interested in literature, this is a really good place to start with sort of philosophical nonfiction. So, Regarding the Pain of Others by Susan Sontag, I highly recommend that one. So this is just a place to start. I think start with nonfiction. So check out some of these if any of them caught your eye. I think I might turn this into a regular segment, because I really enjoy nonfiction, and I'm kind of a busybody, so I like giving people book recommendations. So let me know if you have read any of these and if you've enjoyed them, and yeah, check some of them out and give them a shot. Even though they might not seem like your cup of tea, these are books that I think everyone should read, and that I think will hopefully change the way that you see the world, and change the way that you look at something that is at least accepted or as a fixture in our modern life. So without further ado, I shall see you guys next time then. Doei!